it's Alice, and welcome to what is a very rainy day here in Oslo, and I'm gonna do a reading vlog for the sole purpose of the fact that I'm currently reading this book, and I just want to talk about it. So I put this book on my spring TBR, and it's one of those books that I've had for at least a couple of years now, I think, and it's one of those books. I have a couple of these where I'm so sure that I'm going to love it that I feel no rush to get to it. And it's interesting because so many people have told me that I'm going to love this book, and every time I mention it, everyone is just like, you just have to read it. And I've put it off for a long time, but I just finally started it, and it is so good. I always feel this way with these books that I keep putting off, that when I start reading them and they are as good as I hoped they would be, I'm like, I should have just read it sooner. But I have finally started this. I'm over halfway through. I think I have about 100 pages left. And it's amazing. It's always difficult with really, really good books to explain why they're so good. But it's just so good. A funny thing about this is that the book that I finished before this, I didn't really get on with. I didn't like it very much. And one of the main things that I struggled with was the writing. I didn't think the writing was very good. And sometimes it's hard to pinpoint why. And because of that, sometimes when I finish a book, I'll be like, okay, I didn't like the writing of this. I didn't think it was very good. But then like a minute passes and I start gaslighting myself into thinking that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it actually isn't that bad, and maybe I'm just overreacting or I'm being too strict. But then I started reading this book and I was like, oh yeah, this is what good writing is actually like. Obviously a lot of this is subjective, but you know what I mean. Like, I started reading this and I was like, yes. Immediately yes. The writing is so good, and the story is also very interesting. If you don't know, this is basically mostly a historical fiction novel, but it does have a science fiction element to it that involves, it's basically just time travel. And I remember when I talked about this book, I said that it was a science fiction book, and several of you said like, it's not really a science fiction book. And I get why you say that, because it is mostly historical fiction. The story follows this woman who is living in California in the 1970s, and she is getting pulled back through time to this particular boy who eventually throughout the book turns into a man. So whenever this boy is in mortal peril and he is about to die, and he has several of these instances throughout his life, he somehow calls her to him and she saves his life. That is how she gets into the past. But the thing is, sometimes she gets stuck in the past. Like, she can't just go back and forth whenever she wants. She goes back in time when he is in mortal peril, and she returns to her own time when she thinks that she is about to die. So when she is like in danger. And that's how she travels back and forth. And time in the story is interesting because she is the same age every time she goes into the past, because she can be in the past for like 2 months and then she returns to her own time and only a couple of hours have passed. And then if she stays in her own time for maybe like 5 hours and she's called back again, several years could have passed and she meets this guy who keeps calling her to him. Unintentionally, by the way, he doesn't do it on purpose, but like, he grows older throughout the story, but every time she goes back, she's the same age, because in her time, barely any time passes in between these things. Now, the place she gets pulled back to is the South in America in the 1800s, and she is a black woman, she is married to a white man, and she is pulled back in time, and it's to a place, it's to a plantation, where there are slaves, and she's obviously, you know, black, and she is treated like slaves back then. But she talks like she's educated, which kind of gets her in trouble sometimes. She wears like pants, which is scandalous, and she knows how to read, and there are all of these things, and it's very interesting. There are so many interesting themes in this book. There's themes of race, obviously, slavery, and it's just so much about people and how people lived in those times, and how people are very complicated and complex. And she follows this boy slash man eventually, who is the son of the plantation owner, and he eventually sort of becomes the owner, and there's a lot to do with that. But his character arc so far is just so interesting, and their relationship is really fascinating. And this book is just so freaking good. I also think this book doesn't just discuss a lot of interesting things, it's also incredibly engaging. And I think the fact that we have this time travel element and we never know when it's gonna happen or where this main character is gonna end up and what has happened since last time and all of these things, I think because of that, it adds a tension to the story that works really well, and it makes it exciting. There is a lot of stuff that happens in the book, but there is also a lot of quiet moments, and there are like months that pass where nothing really happens, and it's just very, very interesting. I am definitely going to finish this book today. I did go for a walk this morning, which was very wet, but I've done that. I've been outside for the day, so it's good. And I don't really have that many plans. I do want to do some baking, and then I have these like candle things that I want to make, but I am definitely going to finish this book. I might even start a new one after this, but my main priority is to finish this. I think it's going to be good. I wonder where they end up. It's interesting because in the first scene, we are told kind of where she ends up and what happens to her, but I wonder how they get there. So it's interesting. I said the 1800s, it's 1815. So that's the time she ends up in. Although it does progress through time there, but not in her time. Whatever. I just have to go finish this book now. It's so good. Like, every one of you who kept telling me that this was so good, you were all right. And I'm really glad that I finally just got to it. This is a 5-star read for me. Easily. I know I said this before, but like, I can't believe I waited this long to read this book. But I was right in sort of saving it and thinking that I was gonna love it, because I absolutely did. So good. It's hard to pinpoint what's my favorite part of this book, because all of it is my favorite part. Like, I can't think of a single thing really that I didn't like, or that I sort of went like, don't know about that. Like, all of it is just really good. First of all, I think the writing is amazing. And I remember I did like a tag a while ago where one of the questions was like, do you think a book can be good without great writing? And I've thought about that a lot since I did that tag, and I don't remember what I said, but I think I've made up my mind that it's not possible to have an amazing book without great writing, because that's where all of it starts. I think it's possible to have an entertaining book, even though the writing isn't great, but this writing is just like amazing. And I like how it doesn't really over-explain everything, but you sort of just get it anyway, and the characters are just immediately there. And I think in the beginning we do learn a little bit about this main character and her relationship with her husband, who is white, and how in their time, how that caused problems. And it's interesting to see his perspective on all of this, because there's so many things as a white person that you don't realize is a problem until you come across it, and it surprises you. And it's a very interesting, like, their dynamic is very interesting, and I like how they talk to each other, and I like their relationship. There is also some stuff that happens with him in here that I thought was very interesting, and I was really surprised when it happened. I don't want to give it away, but like, it's a pretty big thing and it's pretty severe. And I think an interesting thing about this book is that one of the sort of recurring themes is how people are able to get used to things that we know is bad, and how you just sort of, life just comes and the everyday comes, and you just sort of have to get through it, and you become sort of numb to things, and you sort of just get used to a lot of things, which is very interesting. But I think it's interesting to have the perspective of both this main character who is black, but also this man who is white, but from like closer to our time. And then, oh, it's just so good. Like, I don't know, I can't explain this book fully, but everyone should read it. It's amazing. I also, and this is a thing that doesn't happen to me very often, but this is one of those books where I immediately kind of want to reread it, because I think that it's the kind of book that, like, if you read it several times, it will give you even more, and it'll make you think even more. And I think if I reread this knowing everything that's going to happen in it, it would make it interesting in a different way as well. So I definitely want to reread this relatively soon. Like, I don't want to forget the whole story before I reread it, but I think that's a mark of a great book. Like, one of my favorite books, The Secret History, is also one of those books where if you reread it, you get more and more from it. And I feel like this is also kind of one of those books, but in a different way. I think it'll make you think deeper and deeper every time you read this book. I definitely also want to read more by this author. Like, I think this could be a new favorite author for me, and I think I have one other book by her on my shelves, which is the first in a trilogy. The cover is really good for that book. I definitely want to pick that up soon. And maybe this will be my year of reading Octavia E. Butler. I think that would be a great reading year for me. And yeah, excellent, excellent book. I am gonna start another book. By the way, this is my second 5-star of the year, which I haven't read that much this year, but my 5-star reads are few and far between, so I'm always excited when I find a new one. Definitely one of my favorite books that I read this year. But I am gonna put it down now because I have finished it, and I'm gonna start another book. I don't know how anyone would follow up after this, but I am gonna start a second one because I'm in a really good reading mood. I'm gonna start this. This is also, I put this on my spring TBR as well, and I don't know, I feel like I just want to read more historical fiction, and this is set, I think, during World War II, and I don't know, I think it's gonna be good. Whenever I pick up one of these books, I think about the fact that, like, in my late teens and my early 20s, basically all I read were books like these, where you have a more contemporary perspective and then a historical perspective, and it switches between the two and they're connected in some way. Like, I remember I loved the books by Kate Morton. All of those books have that kind of structure to it, and I never really know if I actually like these kinds of books or not. I feel like there's a nostalgic element to it that makes me pick them back up and think that I want to read them, but I can't remember if I've really read one of these in newer times where I've like absolutely loved it. I think my main struggle with these kinds of books, I love that I'm talking about my struggle before even starting this, but whatever. One of my main struggles with these kinds of books is that I almost always enjoy the historical perspective more than the present day one. And I guess this is also the kind of book that like splits it, but it's in a very different way, so it doesn't really count because it's the same characters. I think this kind of thing probably works better for me. But thinking back to all of these books that are like this that I've read, I always love the historical perspective, and I don't know if I always feel like the present day perspective adds that much unless we actually follow the same main character in each time. In this, we follow a French woman in Paris in 1939. She is working at the American Library in Paris. And then there is a perspective set in Montana in 1983, where we meet this, I think, teenage girl in small town life in Montana, and she grows close to her reclusive elderly neighbor, who is a French woman, so I'm guessing that's the woman who we meet in the historical perspective. So yeah, I'm gonna give this a go. Actually, now that I know I said that I can't remember a book that I've really liked that is like this, but I think I read one of these books by Isabel Allende where that worked really well for me. So maybe occasionally it works very well, but I do usually end up being more interested in the historical perspective. I think one of the reasons that I kind of want to start this now, though, is that I am in a little bit of a World War II documentary hole where I'm watching a lot of stuff about that because I had a conversation not too long ago about it that made me realize that there's some gaps in my knowledge, especially about like what it was like in Norway. So I'm trying to like educate myself a little bit on that, and it's put me in like a World War II mood. And this also deals with World War II, although it is Paris. So I do think if there is some like library stuff and we talk about books in this, I think that could be really cool. I always love when books are about books, so that could be a really cool element as well, I think. Anyways, I'm gonna go start this now and eat some more of this delicious cake that I made. I used this new kind of like cake form thing that I've never used before, and it makes the cake look really fancy, even though it's kind of not, and it makes me want to eat the entire cake, so I might go do that. So yeah, gonna go read this. I will update you. I'm having such a good reading day, so I'm just gonna ride the wave until it probably eventually passes. Alright, so it's been a few hours actually, and I've made surprisingly good progress on this book. I have read 150 pages. It's pretty easygoing, like it's a fairly quick read. I am feeling like what I thought I would feel about it, which is that I enjoy the historical perspective more than the present day one, but I'm interested to see how the current day one is set in the 80s, so it's not that far after it actually, and it's not that close to this time actually. But I'm interested to see what that perspective is going to bring towards the end of the book. But there is a little part of me that just wishes we had only the historical perspective. I think I mentioned this, but we're following this French woman in 1939 in Paris who is working at the American Library there, and I love all of the parts about like books and reading, and there are several mentions of books that I've read, and there was one in particular that I thought was really good, but I've forgotten what it was because it mentions a lot of different books. But I really like the community at this library, and the part where I'm at now is that war has just broken out, and so all of this is just leading up to the war and the war sort of looming. And I think that our main character in that perspective's like family dynamic and stuff is very interesting. I don't know if I feel like that character is like super original. It does feel a little bit like characters that I've met before, and there are some of her reactions to things that have been a little bit like but yeah, there is a little bit of romance in here as well. But I really like the historical perspective. The perspective that's set in the 80s follows this teenage girl, and her mother is sick. And there's a lot about that, and this French woman is living next door to them. And she's like this mysterious figure in the small town, and no one really knows her, but then they sort of become friends in a way. There is a little part of me that feels like it was surprisingly easy for this teenage girl to like get an in with this older lady who has lived there for like 20 years and barely spoken to anyone. I think maybe it's a little strange that they just got along really well and their lives were sort of intertwining that easily. But I guess in light of the things that are happening, maybe it makes sense. But I don't know. I don't know if I really love that perspective. The good thing about that though is that we get more of the historical perspective than the one in the 80s. So most of the chapters are set in Paris. So I like that. Paris is always a good setting. I feel like I can immediately imagine it. There is also a thing I really like in the beginning, which is a picture of the library. Obviously it's a black and white photo, so you can't see it very well, but I did look it up. And so I have a very good like image of what the setting is supposed to look like. And yeah, war has broken out, so I guess we kind of know what happens now, but it'll be interesting to see what happens to the characters. It does say on the back here that this is a love letter to Paris, the power of books, and the beauty of friendship. And I feel like so far it's delivering on that. There are a couple of friendships in here. Like there are a lot of friendships within the people who work at this library that I love that. Like I think it's so good. And there's especially a friendship between our main character and this English woman, I think she's English, who is really struggling to like find her place in Paris, and she doesn't really have any friends. And she comes to the library and she sort of starts helping out there, and she finds her place, and it's very heartwarming. We haven't seen her for a while though, so I hope she makes a comeback at some point. And I wonder what's gonna happen with this library. I hope it doesn't get bombed or anything. Who knows? I don't really know if I have that much more to say about this at this point. It is a very quick read though. Like the font is pretty big, and it's like the language isn't particularly complicated. I do think it's well written, but it's a pretty quick read. And so even though it's 420-ish pages, I think I'll get through it fairly quickly. And yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna do that much more reading today because I kind of want to watch a movie and then just go to bed. So I might read a little bit more in this before bed, but yeah. I did a lot of reading today and I'm very happy with that. I do think that's going to be the end of this vlog though. I did kind of just make it because I wanted to talk about Kindred because it's such a good book. I know that several of you have read it because several of you have recommended it to me, and I would love to know what your favorite parts of that book were, and if you've like reread it and what parts have stuck with you and all of that. I would love to know. I think I'm gonna end this vlog here in part also because I don't want it to be too long. Sometimes I make vlogs that are very, very long and I'm just talking and talking and talking and not really saying much. But yeah, Kindred was so good. I'm really happy that I found another 5-star read because I haven't had the best luck with my reads the past like couple of weeks, so it's just great to get like a 5-star in. And it might be a new favorite book actually, like one of my top books that I've ever read. It might be too early to say that because I've just finished it and sometimes books fade with time, but I think that's really gonna stick with me and I think I'm gonna think about it a lot. And I really need to read more Octavia E. Butler. I do have that one book by her that I think I'm gonna read next, but if any of you have any recommendations of her work and where you think I should go next, I would love to hear it. As always though, thank you very much for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm gonna go eat some more cake, I think, and I will see you soon. Bye!